You think being single means you're missing out? Everyone around you is pairing up, posting couple photos, talking about their relationships like they've unlocked some secret level of existence. And there you are, alone, wondering if something's wrong with you. But what if I told you that being single isn't just okay? It's actually the most powerful position you can be in right now. This isn't about coping or pretending you don't want connection. It's about understanding a truth that most people discover too late. The relationship you have with yourself determines every other relationship you'll ever have. And right now, while you're single, you have something incredibly rare: the freedom to build that foundation without compromise. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed that your ability to stand alone determines your strength in every situation. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet he spent his mornings in solitude, strengthening his mind before facing the chaos of the day. He knew that external attachments, while beautiful, could never replace internal stability. Let's start with something nobody wants to admit. Most people enter relationships running from themselves. They can't stand their own company, so they seek someone else to fill the void. They're bored, lonely, or afraid of being left behind, so they grab onto the first person who shows interest. Then they wonder why the relationship feels empty 6 months later. Being single forces you to confront yourself. There's no distraction, no one else to blame, no romantic drama to obsess over. Just you and your thoughts. Uncomfortable? Absolutely. But this discomfort is where growth lives. When you're alone, you can't hide from your patterns, your fears, or your weaknesses. You either face them or they consume you. Think about it differently. Every person who rushes into a relationship brings their unresolved issues with them. Their insecurities become jealousy. Their lack of self-worth becomes neediness. Their unhealed past becomes projection onto their partner. They don't realize they're not building a relationship. They're asking another person to fix what only they can repair. You're not doing that. By staying single intentionally, you're choosing to do the work first. Here's what actually happens when you embrace being single with purpose. You start making decisions based purely on what you want, not what someone else expects. Want to spend your Saturday learning a new skill? Done. Want to relocate to a different city for an opportunity? Nothing's stopping you. Want to spend an entire evening in silence just thinking? That's your choice. This freedom isn't selfish, it's strategic. You're in a rare window where your time, energy, and focus are completely yours. Most people waste this opportunity waiting for someone to complete them, not realizing they're supposed to complete themselves first. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Look at how people torture themselves over being single. They imagine everyone else is happier, more fulfilled, living better lives because they have a partner. But talk to people in mediocre relationships, the ones who settled out of fear or impatience, and you'll hear a different story. They're stuck, compromised, wondering if they made a mistake. You're avoiding that trap entirely. Let's address the social pressure because it's real and it's relentless. Family asks when you're going to settle down. Friends make you the third wheel. Society treats single people like they're incomplete puzzles. The message is clear. Something must be wrong with you if you're alone. But since when did the crowd know what's best for you? The same people rushing you into relationships are often miserable in their own. They want you coupled up not because it's good for you, but because your freedom makes them question their choices. Epictetus taught that you should care about what's within your control and ignore everything else. You can't control what others think about your relationship status. You can control whether you use this time to become someone you're proud of or someone desperate for validation. Consider this. Every skill you build now, every lesson you learn, every way you strengthen yourself, that compounds. You're not just passing time until someone shows up. You're constructing the foundation of your entire life. The person you become while single determines the quality of partner you'll attract and the type of relationship you'll build. Weak people attract relationships that reflect their weakness. Strong people attract relationships that match their strength. Which one are you building toward? There's something else happening that most people miss entirely. When you're comfortable being alone, you stop tolerating situations that diminish you. You're not afraid to walk away from relationships that don't serve you because you know being single is better than being with the wrong person. That confidence changes everything. You stop settling. You stop ignoring red flags because you're afraid of being alone. You stop contorting yourself to fit someone else's expectations. The standards you set while single become the standards you maintain in relationships. And that's when something shifts. People sense it. They notice that you're not desperate, not searching, not incomplete. You're whole on your own. That quality, self-sufficiency, contentment, purpose becomes magnetic. Not because you're playing games or pretending, but because you genuinely don't need someone else to feel complete. But we're just getting started. Because being single isn't just about what you avoid or what you build individually. There's a deeper transformation that happens when you truly embrace solitude. One that most people never experience because they're too afraid to be alone long enough to discover it. Solitude teaches what nothing else can. Strip away the distractions of dating, the performances you put on for others, the energy spent managing someone else's emotions. And what's left? You. Raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Most people spend their entire lives running from that confrontation. They jump from relationship to relationship, friendship to friendship, anything to avoid sitting alone with their own thoughts. Why? Because solitude exposes everything you've been avoiding. Your fears become impossible to ignore when there's no one to distract you from them. Your insecurities surface when you can't hide behind someone else's validation. The habits you've been making excuses for reveal themselves when you're the only one watching. That discomfort is exactly why solitude is so valuable. Marcus Aurelius spent time alone with his thoughts every single day, writing what became the Meditations. Not because he wanted to publish a book, but because he understood that a person who can't face themselves honestly is a person who will always be controlled by their weaknesses. Solitude forces honesty. You can lie to friends, partners, even family. But you can't lie to yourself when you're alone at 3 a.m. with nothing but your own mind. The version of yourself that exists in solitude is the truest one. Everything else is performance. Here's what happens when you stop running from that truth. You start noticing patterns you've been repeating for years. The same type of person you keep choosing, the same arguments you keep having, the same situations where you compromise your standards. When you're bouncing from one relationship to another, these patterns stay hidden. But in solitude, they become obvious. You see yourself clearly, maybe for the first time. That clarity is uncomfortable at first because you realize how much time you've wasted, how many mistakes you've repeated. But that discomfort transforms into power when you decide to do something about it. Let me show you what this looks like practically. Say you've always been attracted to people who are emotionally unavailable. In relationships, you probably blamed them, thought you just had bad luck, convinced yourself the next person would be different. But in solitude, you're forced to ask harder questions. Why do I choose people who can't give me what I need? What am I avoiding by picking partners who keep me at a distance? These questions hurt because the answers usually point back to you. Maybe you're avoiding intimacy yourself. Maybe you're recreating dynamics from childhood. Maybe you don't actually believe you deserve better. You can't fix patterns you don't understand, and you can't understand patterns you're too busy to examine. Solitude also strips away the noise of other people's expectations. When you're single and alone with yourself, you finally get to figure out what you actually want, not what you've been told to want. Society programs you from birth. Success looks like this. Happiness requires that. A good life includes these specific milestones. But how much of what you're chasing actually resonates with who you are? Most people never find out because they're too busy performing for an audience. The job that impresses people but drains you. The relationship that looks good on social media but feels empty. The lifestyle you adopted because everyone else seemed to want it. Epictetus said that freedom is the only worthy goal in life. Real freedom comes from knowing yourself so completely that external opinions become irrelevant. You can't reach that level of self-knowledge without spending serious time alone. Not lonely, not isolated, but genuinely comfortable in your own company. There's a test for this. Can you spend an entire weekend alone without feeling like you're missing out? Can you sit in silence for an hour without reaching for your phone? Can you eat alone at a restaurant without feeling self-conscious? If not, you're still dependent on others for your sense of worth. That dependency will sabotage every relationship you enter because you'll need your partner to fill a void that only you can fill. Something shifts when you become genuinely self-sufficient emotionally. You stop tolerating disrespect because you'd rather be alone. You stop chasing people who don't value you because your own company is better. You stop making yourself smaller to fit someone else's expectations because you've built something in solitude that you're not willing to compromise. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect earned through the hard work of facing yourself honestly. But here's where it gets interesting. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the more attractive you become to others. Not in a superficial way, but in a way that draws quality people toward you. Why? Because desperate energy repels. Contentment attracts. When you need someone, people sense it. They feel the weight of your expectations, the pressure of filling your emptiness. But when you're whole on your own, when your life has meaning and purpose, regardless of your relationship status, that confidence becomes magnetic. You're not looking for someone to save you. You're looking for someone to share an already fulfilling life with. That's a completely different proposition. The irony is perfect. Spend enough time genuinely embracing solitude and you'll stop being single. Not because you were trying to attract someone, but because you became the type of person worth knowing. But you can't fake this. You can't pretend to be comfortable alone while secretly desperate for a relationship. People sense authenticity. They know the difference between someone who's genuinely self-sufficient and someone who's just playing a role. The transformation has to be real, and real transformation requires time, discomfort, and honest self-examination. So what actually changes during this process? What specific shifts happen when you stop avoiding solitude and start embracing it? First, your relationship with your own thoughts completely transforms. Most people can't stand the sound of their own mind. The constant commentary, the criticism, the anxiety loop, it's exhausting. So they drown it out with noise, distractions, other people's voices. But when you sit with yourself long enough, something unexpected happens. The mental chaos doesn't disappear, but you stop being controlled by it. You learn which thoughts deserve attention and which ones are just background static. This skill is invaluable. In relationships, most conflicts happen because people react to their thoughts about a situation rather than the situation itself. Your partner forgets to text back, and your mind creates an entire narrative about what that means. They seem distant one evening, and suddenly you're convinced the relationship is ending. But when you've spent real time observing your own thought patterns in solitude, you recognize these stories for what they are: mental fabrications, not facts. You develop the ability to pause before reacting, to question your interpretations, to separate reality from the drama your mind likes to create. Second, you discover what actually energizes you versus what drains you. This sounds simple, but most people have no idea. They've been so busy meeting expectations and fulfilling obligations that they've never stopped to notice which activities leave them feeling alive and which ones leave them depleted. Solitude forces this awareness. When you're alone, there's no one to perform for, no one to impress. You can't hide behind being busy or needed. You have to confront the question directly. What do I actually enjoy? Some people discover they hate the social activities they thought defined them. Others realize the quiet hobbies they dismissed as boring are actually deeply satisfying. Someone might find that the career they've been grinding toward doesn't excite them at all, while a side interest they barely acknowledged feels like coming home. This clarity is crucial because it determines the type of partner you need. If you don't know what fulfills you, you'll end up with someone whose lifestyle conflicts with your actual nature. You might pair up with someone who loves constant social interaction when you actually thrive in quieter environments. Or vice versa. These mismatches don't come from bad intentions. They come from not knowing yourself well enough to choose wisely. Third, your standards shift dramatically. Not because you become pickier in a shallow way, but because you've built a life you actually like. When you're miserable alone, you'll tolerate almost anything to escape that misery. Bad behavior gets excused. Red flags get ignored. Incompatibility gets rationalized away. But build a life in solitude that genuinely satisfies you, and suddenly your tolerance for nonsense drops to zero. Why Why would you compromise your peace for someone who brings drama? Why would you sacrifice your growth for someone who isn't interested in theirs? The desperation that makes people settle evaporates when being alone becomes preferable to being with the wrong person. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. When you've spent time alone improving that quality, you become acutely aware of how other people's energy affects your mental state. Someone who constantly complains, who plays victim, who refuses to take responsibility. These patterns become immediately obvious and immediately unacceptable. Fourth, you develop genuine independence in a way that strengthens rather than threatens relationships. There's a difference between the independence that comes from fear of intimacy and the independence that comes from self-sufficiency. Fear-based independence pushes people away because it's really just protection. Self-sufficient independence draws the right people closer because it removes neediness from the equation. When you've learned to handle your emotions alone, to solve your own problems, to find meaning in your own pursuits, you don't need a relationship to function. You want one, which is completely different. This distinction changes everything. Need creates pressure. Want creates freedom. In a relationship built on want rather than need, both people have room to breathe, to grow, to maintain their individual identities. There's no suffocation, no resentment about lost independence, no feeling trapped. Each person brings a full life to the table rather than expecting the other person to provide one. Fifth, you learn the difference between loneliness and solitude. They're not the same thing, though most people use the terms interchangeably. Loneliness is a painful feeling of lack, of something missing. Solitude is a chosen state of being alone that feels rich rather than empty. You can be lonely in a crowded room or at peace completely alone. The shift from experiencing aloneness as loneliness to experiencing it as solitude is transformative because it proves you're no longer dependent on external validation for your sense of wholeness. This matters in relationships because people who haven't made this shift bring their loneliness into every interaction. They need constant reassurance, constant contact, constant proof that they matter. It's exhausting for everyone involved. But someone who's comfortable in solitude brings calm instead of desperation. They can give their partner space without spiraling into anxiety. They can enjoy time together without clinging. They can maintain their sense of self even in a committed relationship. The process isn't comfortable. Facing yourself honestly never is. You'll discover things you don't like, patterns you need to break, wounds you need to heal. But avoiding this work doesn't make it go away. It just ensures you'll drag all of it into your next relationship, where it'll cause the same problems it caused in the last one. So how do you actually do this? How do you transform solitude from something you fear into something that makes you stronger? Start small, but start deliberately. Most people fail at solitude because they go from constant distraction to complete isolation, and the silence becomes overwhelming. Your mind isn't used to it. All the thoughts you've been drowning out with noise suddenly have space to surface, and it's uncomfortable. Begin with manageable doses. Turn off the music during your commute. Sit with your coffee for 10 minutes without reaching for your phone. Take a walk without headphones. Notice how your mind reacts to the absence of input. Does it race toward worry? Does it immediately start replaying conversations or imagining scenarios? Just observe without judgment. This awareness is the foundation. Create rituals that anchor you to yourself rather than to external validation. Morning pages work for some people. 3 pages of stream of consciousness writing before you do anything else. The content doesn't matter. The practice of turning inward first thing, before the world gets its hooks in you, trains your mind to find its center. For others, it might be meditation, though not the complicated kind that requires special cushions and mantras. Just sitting quietly, focusing on your breath, noticing when your mind wanders and gently bringing it back. 5 minutes builds the skill as effectively as 50 if you're consistent. Physical practices help because they ground you in your body, which is always in the present moment. Your mind might be replaying yesterday or rehearsing tomorrow, but your body exists only right now. Running, lifting weights, yoga. Whatever gets you physically engaged creates a feedback loop between sensation and awareness that strengthens your ability to stay present. You start noticing patterns, how stress manifests in your shoulders, how anxiety speeds your breathing, how anger creates tension in your jaw. This body awareness becomes an early warning system in relationships, alerting you when something's off before your mind has rationalized it away. Pursue something difficult that requires sustained focus. Learn an instrument, study a language, build something with your hands. The point isn't mastery, it's the process of struggling alone with a challenge, failing repeatedly and continuing anyway. This builds frustration, tolerance, and self-reliance in a way that social activities never can. When you're alone with a problem, there's no one to blame, no one to save you, no audience to perform for. You either figure it out, or you don't. That relationship with difficulty, that willingness to sit with not knowing, transfers directly to emotional resilience. Examine your relationship with boredom, because that's where most people break. The moment things get quiet, they reach for stimulation. Social media, texting, streaming something, calling someone, anything to fill the space. But boredom is just your mind's resistance to being understimulated, and that resistance dissolves with practice. Sit through it. Let the restlessness peak and pass. On the other side, you'll find something valuable, the ability to generate interest from within rather than consuming it from without. People who can't tolerate boredom alone will create chaos in relationships just to feel something. Challenge your narratives about yourself. We all carry stories. Solitude gives you space to question whether these stories are actually true or just comfortable lies you've told yourself so many times they feel like facts. Maybe you're not actually introverted. Maybe you just learned to protect yourself by withdrawing. Maybe you're not actually independent. Maybe you just never learned to trust anyone. These realizations only come when you're alone long enough for the performance to drop and the truth to surface. Pay attention to what you miss when you're alone versus what you think you should miss. Society tells you that being alone should feel incomplete, that you should be constantly seeking partnership. But what do you actually experience? You might discover you don't miss having someone around as much as you miss the validation they provided. Or you might find you genuinely enjoy partnership, but you've been choosing people who drain rather than energize you. The difference matters because it determines what you're looking for. Practice making decisions without consensus. Small ones at first. Where to eat, what to watch, how to spend your Saturday. Notice the discomfort of not being able to deflect responsibility onto someone else. Notice how you second-guess yourself, wondering if you made the right choice. Stay with that uncertainty until you realize that most decisions don't have a right answer. They just have consequences you either accept or adjust. This decisiveness, this willingness to commit to a choice and own the outcome, becomes incredibly attractive to potential partners because it signals someone who won't make the relationship responsible for their happiness. Journal specifically about your patterns in past relationships, not to wallow, but to extract data. What attracted you initially? When did you first notice red flags? What did you ignore? What needs were you trying to meet through the other person? Write it out in detail because patterns hidden in your head become obvious on paper. You'll start seeing the same dynamics playing out with different actors, which means the common variable is you. That's not blame, it's power, because you can change you. Set boundaries with yourself the way you'd need to set them with a partner. If you can't enforce limits on your own behavior, your screen time, your spending, your commitments, you won't enforce them in relationships either. Practice saying no to yourself, not as punishment but as evidence that you can prioritize long-term well-being over short-term comfort. This self-governance translates directly into the kind of boundaries that keep relationships healthy rather than codependent. The transformation doesn't happen on a schedule. Some people need months, others need years. But you'll know you're ready when solitude stops feeling like something you're enduring and starts feeling like something you're choosing. When you stop checking your phone hoping for a message that'll rescue you from yourself. When you can sit through an entire evening alone without feeling like you're missing out on life happening somewhere else. The real test comes when you meet someone while you're in this space. You'll notice immediately that the dynamic feels different. You're not trying to fill a void or complete yourself. You're actually evaluating whether this person adds genuine value to an already functional life. That's a completely different filter than most people use. Most approach dating from scarcity, from please choose me, which means they'll overlook incompatibilities just to avoid being alone again. You're approaching from abundance, from let's see if this fits, which means you can walk away from almost right situations without feeling like you're giving up your only chance. Watch how you communicate needs. People who haven't done the solo work either suppress their needs entirely, playing the accommodating partner until resentment builds. Or they express needs through complaints and criticisms instead of clear requests. You'll find yourself able to say things like, I need more advance notice for plans, or I value alone time on weekends without apology or aggression. Just facts about how you operate. The right person hears that as useful information. The wrong person hears it as rejection. Their reaction tells you everything. Notice whether you're attracted to their chaos or their calm. Unhealed people are drawn to drama because it feels like passion. to instability because it feels like excitement. They mistake anxiety for chemistry. When you've spent real time with yourself, you develop a taste for peace. You're attracted to people whose presence feels like exhaling, not holding your breath. That doesn't mean boring, it means secure. It means someone who doesn't need to create problems to feel alive. The relationship becomes a collaboration between two whole people rather than a merger between two incomplete halves desperately trying to form one functional unit. You bring your interests, they bring theirs. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. Neither person disappears into the relationship because both maintain the individual practices that keep them grounded. You still take time alone. You still pursue separate goals. The relationship enhances rather than replaces your individual life. Here's what changes practically. You stop checking in constantly because you trust both yourself and them to exist independently for hours without the connection dissolving. You stop needing reassurance about their feelings because you're not basing your worth on their validation. You stop preemptively managing their emotions because you recognize they're responsible for their own internal state just as you're responsible for yours. These shifts create space, not distance, but breathing room. The relationship becomes sustainable instead of suffocating. Conflict looks different too. You don't take disagreements as evidence the relationship is failing because you know that two people with their own perspectives will occasionally clash. You can hear criticism without crumbling because your self-concept isn't fragile. You can admit when you're wrong because being right isn't protecting your ego anymore. You can ask for what you need without manipulation because you've already proven to yourself that you'll survive if they say no. That kind of directness resolves issues in hours that used to take weeks of passive-aggressive dancing. The irony completes itself when you realize that becoming someone who doesn't need a relationship makes you exponentially better in one. You're not bringing desperation, neediness, or unresolved trauma to the table. You're bringing curiosity, stability, and the capacity to actually see the other person instead of just seeing what you need them to be. That's rare enough that it changes what's available to you. You stop attracting people who want to fix you or be fixed by you and start attracting people who want to build something with you. But even with the right person, you'll still need to choose yourself sometimes. Relationships create a gravitational pull toward fusion, toward gradually abandoning the practices that made you healthy in the first place. You'll need to consciously maintain your relationship with solitude even when partnership is available. That means protecting time alone even when they want to hang out. That means pursuing your goals even when it'd be easier to just merge schedules completely. That means returning to yourself regularly to make sure you're not slowly disappearing again. Some people hear this and think it sounds lonely, like you're holding yourself apart even within connection. It's the opposite. You're bringing your full self to the relationship instead of a partial dependent version. You're loving from overflow instead of deficit. That creates the kind of intimacy most people spend their entire lives seeking. The experience of being fully known and still fully chosen. But it only works when both people have done this work. When both people are complete enough individually that the relationship becomes optional in the best possible sense. Not I could leave tomorrow, but I'm here by choice, not compulsion. The time you spend alone isn't wasted or just preparation for something better. It's the foundation. It's where you learn who you are when nobody's watching, what you value when nobody's influencing you, what you're capable of when nobody's rescuing you. Those answers don't just make you better at relationships, they make you better at being human. And that matters whether you end up partnered or not, because either way, you're the one person you'll never escape. You might as well get good at your own company. You've been doing this work whether you realized it or not. Every moment you chose yourself over settling. Every evening you sat with discomfort instead of calling someone to fix it. Every decision you made without needing permission. That was building something. Not everyone will understand why you've stayed single this long. They'll project their fears onto your choices, assume you're damaged or too picky or afraid of commitment. Let them think whatever helps them sleep at night. You know what's actually happening. You're refusing to sacrifice your peace for someone else's timeline. You're declining to merge with another person before you fully become yourself. You're protecting the life you've built from people who would diminish it rather than enhance it. That's not fear. That's wisdom earned through the hard work of facing yourself honestly. The relationship will come when it comes, and it'll be better because of this time you spent alone. Or it won't come, and you'll still have built a life that doesn't require another person to feel complete. Either way, you win. Because the real victory isn't finding the perfect partner. It's becoming someone you don't need to escape from. Once you've done that, everything else becomes optional instead of necessary. And optional is exactly where you want to be. Because that's where real choice lives. That's where freedom exists. That's where you finally stop asking if you're good enough for someone else and start asking if they're good enough for the life you've built.